Hi everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Port Phillip City Council. City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willem clan of the Boonwurrung. We pay our respect to their elders, both past and present. We acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship with this land. I remind the gallery that Council's meeting local law requires that members of the gallery must not interject or take part in councillor debate. Any person who is called to order may be requested to leave the chamber. Notwithstanding this, I as Mayor may and will invite members of the gallery to speak for up to 3 minutes on a report listed on the agenda. There is also time allotted tonight's agenda for public question time. If you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form outside and hand it to a staff member. If you've registered to speak online, you must let a staff member know that you have arrived. I encourage you to limit your questions and comments to 3 minutes and to avoid repeating any points that have already been made by other speakers. Hi, Desley. Please note that all council meetings are now live streamed to allow the community to watch and listen to meetings in real time. In accordance with council's local law, this meeting cannot be separately filmed or audio taped unless you've obtained permission from me. In the unlikely event of an emergency evacuation, please follow the instructions of the emergency warden. 1. Apologies. Councillors, we have no apologies because everyone's here. Mazel tov. 2. Minutes for the previous meetings. Councillors, the minutes for the ordinary meeting on 16 October 2019 have been circulated. Are there any questions in relation to these minutes? Happy to move. Is Councillor Simic? Thanks very much. Seconded by Councillor Voss. Are there any questions? If not, I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Declarations of conflicts of interest. Does anyone have a conflict of interest in a matter being discussed at tonight's meeting? Nothing. Agenda item 4, petitions and joint ventures. We have one joint letter and one petition on tonight's agenda. Councillors, we've received no request from the member of the public in relation to the joint letter on the Domain Precinct and one on the community garden in Port Melbourne. Let's move to item 4.1, the joint letter Domain Precinct Public Realm Masterplan, a further submission from G12 and Domain Precinct Residents Group. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Voss.
Yes, I'd just like to understand what's the process from this. I know that there is officer comment. However, the letter does ask for it to be looked at differently than the officer comment, and I'm just wondering how we will be doing that.
Good question. Can I ask Mr. Dewar to perhaps help us on this?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, obviously we have already supplied some officer comment to the joint letter this evening, but a number of the issues that have been raised are also things that we are also taking into account and doing further review of, such as the planning controls for St Kilda Road North, for example, which we're actively monitoring. Some of the other project work around Park Street, for example, is an ongoing project conversation with Rail Projects Victoria, and we are actively working with them to look at how we might be able to signalise the Park and Wells Street intersection, for example. So we can continue to look at all of those points, but some of them are already being actioned, and others will have to take on notice.
This will come back to council, though. It's been received and noted tonight, and then there will be a reply to it at a future council meeting. Is that correct, Mr. Stewart?
Through you, Mayor, yes, we can come back to a future council meeting, but
if we need to.
A normal process for a joint letter is to note it and then to come back.
Okay, Councillor Voss?
So just would like to clarify that. It will be coming back with further items.
And if I can add to that, the officer's recommendation just says receives and notes the joint letter. So
correct, but I do think it needs to come back with further review.
You can move that as a recommendation, alt-rec. Okay, any further questions? Councillor Simic?
Councillor Voss, did you want to move that as an alt-rec?
Oh yes, sorry, you didn't have a question? Yes, I was keen to put in another... So, just at the end of that, so I'd like to move... Sorry, I'm just trying to get to it. So it just says that council receives and notes the joint letter. I'd like to add number 2 to that, that it considers the questions and the comments of the joint letter and comes back to council with a response to that.
Seconded by Councillor Simic, moved by Councillor Voss. Councillor Copsey?
I'll just foreshadow that should this motion fail, I'll move the officer's rec.
Thanks very much. So, Councillor Voss, do you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I know Councillor Pearl and I have had numerous conversations with some of the representatives of this group, and it was quite clear to us that they felt that many of their concerns were not taken on board. This joint letter has been written to us explaining what those concerns are, and that so I think it's incumbent on us to have another look rather than just regurgitating the same responses that we had in the original plan, and act on it appropriately.
Councillor Simic?
Well, I think it's vital that members of our community feel like we're taking their feedback into consideration. One of the concerns from representatives of the G12 is that to date some of the concerns haven't been taken into effect, and so this gives us an opportunity to bring this back to a future council meeting and for us to discuss this further again and respond to any outstanding concerns in a formal sense. So I support the alternate recommendation.
Any further speakers? I'm going to say something. Okay, Councillor Bond.
I won't be supporting this and will support the original officer's recommendation. I understand there's a lot of concerns with this group with regard to what was voted on the night, but the time for us to take into account their concerns, and they were raised with all of us prior to that meeting, was on the night we voted on the Domain Precinct Public Realm Masterplan. I don't see... The officers have gone through and given a very thorough response to the joint letter. I don't feel that this needs to come back to another council meeting to give another thorough response to this joint letter. So I won't be supporting this motion and will support the original officer's recommendation.
Councillor Pearl?
Thanks very much. I'm happy to support it. Councillor Bond is right when he says that this letter was sent in as part of the master plan submission. That's true. And the responses in this response from the officers are virtually exactly the same to that. But this is a further letter in response to that item. It's not necessarily directly in relation to that item, and there's still a number of matters in this letter that need to be considered well outside the master planning process. And I don't think the officers have necessarily given as much time and attention to this letter versus what they've already done in the past. It's basically exactly the same responses. So I think there's value in reconsidering the contents of the letter outside the conversation of the master plan, and we bring it back to council so we ensure that these residents' concerns are fully considered.
I just want to say I'm a bit torn on this because they wrote in relation to a public realm master plan, most of their concerns are, as Councillor Bond said, beyond what goes into a public realm master plan. They're concerned about all sorts of planning issues which have little to do with this public realm master plan. So, and then I'm torn between that and the fact that we need to perhaps explain publicly to them that they've got angry about the wrong document. So I'm torn a bit. I'll make my mind up when we go to the vote. Councillor Crawford.
I won't be supporting the alternate recommendation because I do think that the challenges for this area are huge. I had make no mince about that. I won't. But the thing is, a lot of the changes, it's a radically changing area, and unfortunately the way that it's always been is not going to be able to be the same. And yes, we need to continue to look at how we try and manage some of it, but some of it is beyond, again, what council can deliver. And yes, it is no longer going to be like everyone have a car, like it's a really changing area. And I think that we have to try and help manage those changes, but I don't see that the public realm so much is going to adjust that. So I'm happy to just accept and note the letter.
Okay. Any further? Councillor Voss, do you wish to close?
Yes, briefly. I do think that most of this letter is in the remit of what council can deliver. I think the only thing that is outside of the public realm master plan is the request to do a built form master plan, and apart from that, advocating for the tram stop. The rest is totally within our. Not sure what document you're reading, but it is totally within our realm. Perhaps the Anzac Station component, but they're not asking for anything there. They're just saying it should be considered as part of it. So I think I obviously put this up with a slight change to come back because most of the comments here are a regurgitation from the original documentation, and there's no new thought into it. This group has put this up primarily because they didn't feel that all items were dealt with appropriately or satisfactorily. So I still think there's some outstanding, and so I would like your support on it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? I am going to get off the fence. I'm going to, as my usual practice is, cast in favour of the officer's rec.
Division required.
Okay. All those in favour? Councillors Simic, Brand, Pearl and Voss. All those against? Councillor Copsey, Bond, Crawford, Baxter and Gross. I declare the alternative motion lost. Go to the foreshadowed motion of Councillor Copsey. Is there a seconder for that? Moved Councillor Bond. Do you wish to speak?
I note Councillor Voss's intent with the alternate recommendation. My understanding, I'm sure I'll be corrected during debate if I'm wrong, is that we have previously seen this submission, and the reason it's being brought tonight as a joint letter is just for formal acceptance. So it's correct that the officer's response should remain consistent, and there is a consistent response that's been provided to each of the concerns. outlined in the letter. I'm sure that feedback, where it's relevant to projects outside the Domain Master Plan, will be taken on board and noted and dealt with in future as we progress other projects in this important area. So I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation tonight.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bond? Anyone else? Councillor Pearl?
Yeah, I'm going to vote against this. It just doesn't go far enough. We've received a joint letter. We're just going to take it in, send the same response we sent back. We're not reviewing in detail what the contents of this letter is, albeit I fully admit the word master plan is clear to us in terms of the work we've done and the reports that we've considered as council. But councillors, the word master plan means very, very different things when we go out into the community. So we shouldn't use a misunderstanding of what the process previously was to allay legitimate concerns of our community.
I might say something. I agree with you 100%. I'm just saying that I don't know that receiving and noting it precludes us from doing what you recommend. No, that's true. Do you wish to close? Oh, sorry, Councillor Voss.
I just wanted to address Councillor Copsey's point. This is a different letter. It's not the same letter at all. It does have a number of the same points in it, though. So just wanted to make you aware of that. But I agree with Councillor Pearl. There's been some time taken, quite considerable discussion had amongst many of the buildings in that area, and they've come to an agreement on this letter, which is it's not a simple process. And they believe that they should have sent in this letter. Now, I think the very act of sending in a joint letter needs to be respected and not just ticked off and going, okay, we got one and that's it. So I think we need to take more care about it and give it the respect it deserves. So I'll also be voting against this.
Councillor Brand?
Turning into a long debate. I'll be voting for it on my understanding that if council receives and notes the joint letter, it doesn't mean that we receive, note and bin it or file it or forever and never see it again. I do assume that every time we receive a note, a letter or a petition, that we actually do something about it later on. So on that basis, I'll be voting for this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Copsey, do you wish to close? Move to the vote. All those... Sorry? Happy to do another division. All those in favour? Councillors Copsey, Brand, Bond, Gross, Crawford and Baxter. All those against? Councillor Voss, Pearl and Simic. I declare that carried. I'll now move on to the petition on tonight's agenda, which is establishing a community garden in Port Melbourne. We have one person from the community, Sandra Pullman. Hi. Could I ask you just to sit at that seat over there and push a button which makes your microphone go on? Thanks very much.
Hello?
Hi. You're on. Your 3 minutes starts now.
No, okay. I live in Port Melbourne and I initiated a... Sorry, I'm getting nervous. I initiated a petition to establish a small community garden near where I live. Could I have the next slide, please? So, myself, I collected 80 signatures of local residents indicating to the council that there was interest, and we would like it somewhere either in the the Howe or the Smith Reserve to grow our own fruit and vegetables. We're asking the council if they would establish something like the one in Lyle Street, not a full-blown community garden, but here is a picture that I've taken of the boxes. The aim is also to bring the local people together to encourage more people to grow their own fresh food and to reduce waste. We'd also like a small compost area so we could help reduce compost. to produce compost. Could I have the next slide, please? Most of the people who I spoke to either live in terrace houses or apartment blocks, and we don't have the room or the 6 to 8 hours of required sunlight to grow any fruit and vegetables. Could I please have the next slide? My research indicates there's a waiting list at Dig In, which is down on Williamstown Road, for up to 8 or 9 people, which could mean a 12-month waiting list or more. I just called it the Raglan and Knott Street Community Garden. I just thought of the name. We are about over a kilometre, 1.5 from Lyle Street Community Garden and the Graham Street Community Garden. We don't feel that we're a part of those community gardens. And also when you're taking your tools, you can't put them in your wheelbarrow and trundle that far. And then driving is not environmentally friendly. Could I have the next slide, please? Once the community garden has been established, we, with the local residents, will be responsible for planting, purchasing, watering and removing the green waste. Myself and one of my neighbours, we're both professional horticulturalists. Like all other community gardens, we will have working bees and create a watering roster system to look after it. I thought we might as well ask at this time, we'd like to establish a compost heap and have some fruit and citrus trees around it, like the Lyle Community Garden, which is 5 boxes. And I think there's one more. We've identified possible sites, and we would like to arrange with a council representative to meet on site to go over our proposal. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for your efforts. That's fantastic. We've got no further questions. You can take your seat again, Sandra. Thanks very much. Councillors, questions? Resolutions? Oh, Councillor Copsey, sorry.
Thanks. So the resolution put forward by officers' recommendation, I just wanted to seek clarity on whether anything needed to be done in order for this petition to form part of the feedback that's being provided by the public to the open space strategy, the public space strategy, or whether that will be done automatically by officers.
Through you, Mr Mayor. The issue of community gardens will be one that will be considered as part of the overall public space strategy that won't detail the specifics of individual proposals that might form part of a later implementation plan.
Can I ask a follow-up? Can you
Sure.
remind me the timeline on the implementation plan?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the public space strategy is still in development, and as such we actually haven't written or completed the implementation plan. The idea being, though, that would be a multi-year program, potentially looking out over the next 10 years.
Councillor Voss?
So I'd like to ask a question about the compost in particular. This has been an area that's not included in anything I've seen in the public open space documentation, but how can we get a compost up and running when all of them, including all of them around, are totally at capacity and not taking any more compost, so we are in need of a compost? And if you can't answer that, can we have maybe that taken on notice so that we could have some understanding of where and when we could implement composts around the municipality?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I would like to take that on notice, given that question ties into the sort of the more complex question of food organics and other things that we're considering in the Don't Waste It strategy at the moment.
Thanks very much, Mr Dewar. Do we have a mover of the...
So just to be clear to the petitioner, this will result in no answer to the petitioner for
Is this
a
question?
year or more. Is that correct? When will the petitioner get a response about where, if her community garden will be developed?
Through you, Mayor, I think that's correct. It will be when the public space policy and strategy is endorsed. What I would say is that the officers receive regular calls about establishment of community gardens, and at the moment there's no guidelines or policy on community gardens. It's a really important issue in terms of contested public space, and we do need some guidelines as to how we allocate that precious public space. And we also need guidelines if we're going to have community gardens. Well, we need a budget allocation if we're going to have community gardens, which we don't have currently. But we also need guidelines around what constitutes a community garden, and that would cover, assuming, and I must say that in the consultations to date there's been quite a few mentions of the need for community gardens. But, for example, other councils that have policies, they have guidelines as to how you ensure equal access to residents in a particular community. So I think they would all have to be dealt with. So obviously it's up to council to make alternative resolutions, but that's our recommendation, in that currently we don't have a framework for making decisions. We think the best way to deal with that is through the open space strategy.
Thanks very much, Mr. Keenan. Do we have a resolution? I'll move it. I'll move the officer's recommendation. Seconded by Councillor Baxter. I wish to reserve my right. Does anyone wishes to speak?
I'm going to vote against it because I just don't. I think we can just do this. I don't think we need a framework or a policy to work this out. There's complexities with leases and licences and insurance, but it's a pretty simple request. It informs the strategy because you'll have something for 12 months to see if it works on a small scale. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, we'll pull it apart and hopefully get your plot and dig in. But I think we're undercomplicating it. We should just say, yes, it's a reasonable idea. We'll find a spot. Is the spot appropriate? Can we get a 1 year licence in place? Get them to pay the $129 public liability insurance and just build it.
Thanks very much. Councillor Simic?
I agree with Councillor Peel in regards to this. I think we're just kicking the can down the road. It's actually something that's needed in the community. Obviously, there's a want for it from people here tonight, but more broadly as well. And it's part of our broader solutions that we're working towards around educating and encouraging people to be thinking about more sustainable ways of engaging in things. So I'd like to see a more considered approach as opposed to a quite a lengthy approach. And I think, should this fail, I'd consider putting up an alternate recommendation.
Thanks very much, Councillor Simic. I neglected to call the seconder, Councillor Baxter.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I actually agree quite a lot with what Councillor Peel and Councillor Simic were saying. That what I was going to say is that I think we can pass this, which encourages people to get involved, but that I would actually like us to investigate. Oh, there you go. Your sign is gone, Mr. Mayor. I'd like us to investigate options within the existing policy about how we can actually respond to these many queries we're getting for community gardens. I definitely want to have a strategic basis behind it. I want it to be part of the open space strategy. That's very, very important. But in the meantime, I'd like us to have a couple of short-term strategies in the meantime. I don't necessarily think that has to be a council decision though, so we can pass this and I think we can go back to the officers and ask for some short-term solutions personally.
You've already had a go, Councillor Simic.
May I suggest an amendment to the resolution?
Absolutely.
So to add point 3, which is for officers to consider how we can respond to to this specific request and other similar requests. And other similar requests within a shorter time frame.
Is there a seconder for that amendment? Seconded by Councillor Voss. Do you have a question?
Can I just ask a question? I know we're asking for this, but Mr. Keenan just said there's no budget to fund any community gardens, so I would see that as a number one problemo.
What's the question?
So the question is there any budget to implement any community garden if we were inclined to do so?
No, not on your current budget. You'd need to allocate funds.
So the question I've got before I make a ruling is paragraph 3 in contravention of the intent of paragraphs 1 and 2, so it's out of order? No. So it's still a legitimate amendment? No, yes. Okay, so we can deal with the amendment. Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment, understanding that... Okay.
Yep. This council's never let a budget get in the way of us wanting to do something. I can assure you of that. So, and we shouldn't underestimate the... I don't think this... You got a couple of qualified horticulturalists. I assume they have some decent trade connections. We've got Bunnings down the road that's desperate to give decent community groups help.
Could you address the amendment, please?
I'm talking to the amendment. This amendment actually enables the community and the officers to go out and work for a creative solution that may not cost council a cent. We might be able to get the materials, get the people together and do this within the budget. And if we can't, I'm sure we can find this amount of money to get this done and move it forward. Pardon me.
Okay, any further speeches? I'll now move to the consideration of the amendment that those words in 3 be added. All those in favour? All those against?
Councillor Brand, could you wake up, please? Are you okay?
Okay, that amendment's clearly carried. I'll now move to... so there's been an amendment. Does anyone wish to add to the now amended motion? I'll move to the vote on the amended substantive motion. All those in favour? That's clearly carried unanimously. Okay. So does that make sense at all to you, Sandra? I think that's generally good news.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure whether you said yes or no.
So we haven't said we're given a qualified yes. I think that's fair to say. We'll speak to you later. We better get on with the rest. Okay. Agenda item 5 is the sealing schedule. Councillors, we have no documents that require sealing. Councillors, we have a condolence motion. Prior to public question time, pursuant to Council's meeting procedure local law, the CEO has requested, and I have given consent to, the adding of a condolence motion to the agenda tonight. If we can put up that condolence motion, I'll read it out. Alexis Lexi Elizabeth Brown was a valued employee who worked at the City of Port Phillip for 18 years, from 1998 to 2016, and sadly lost her battle with cancer in October 2019. Lexi started at the City of Port Phillip in August 1998 and retired in July 2016. Lexi held a number of roles during her time at Port Phillip, but spent the majority of her career here supporting our executive leadership team as EA to the General Manager of Corporate Services and acting EA to the Chief Executive Officer. I knew Lexi, and she provided sound advice to staff during her 18 years of service. She was deeply committed to the organisation and the municipality, and she was a fountain of knowledge of the City of Port Phillip information. Her advice and wisdom was a great support to all staff, and especially those new to the organisation. Lexi developed some great and intimate relationships and close friendships with her colleagues at Port Phillip. Lexi's time at this council has left an enduring memory on her colleagues, and she will be long remembered. Councillors, I seek someone to move the motion on the screen. Moved by Councillor Crawford and seconded by Councillor Baxter. Does anyone wish to speak to the motion? Okay, I'm happy just to speak and say, look, I read out some fairly desiccated, dry language. That desiccated language, though, doesn't indicate both the contribution that Lexi made, the depth of affection that people felt for her. She was a real character. She was at times scary, particularly if you're a fat little mare, and yet we all adored her. She worked for many of the people at the senior levels of our organisation, and she was the den mother of much of the organisation. She was very brave in the way she dealt with her breast cancer. She conquered breast cancer, but sometimes you can't fight hard enough. It's been moved and seconded. I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thanks very much, councillors. Public question time. Councillors, we have 4 people who have requested to ask a question tonight. I'll take these requests in the order in which they were received. I'll now call James Willett to come forward. James, could you please take a seat and press the button? And this is about questions.
My name is James Willett. I live in Middle Park and I represent the members of the Middle Park Library Action Group here tonight. Since February 2019, the group has been carrying out a review of the 44 public libraries in 9 inner Melbourne municipalities to better inform councillors, officials and concerned residents about what's happening in our libraries. The review has over 50 pages of photographs and details of each of the 44 libraries. It has 14 pages on the good things happening, the challenges and how Port Phillip's libraries compare. It is 11 pages of comparative tables from the Public Libraries Victoria Network statistics. I'd like now to present each councillor with their own copy of the review. Could those be distributed, please? Councillors, I have good news for you. Small libraries are booming. The little Yarraville...
Sorry, could I... this isn't a moment for presentation. This is public question time.
I am coming to the questions.
Okay.
Councillors. Mr Mayor, small libraries are booming throughout Victoria. If I can refer to page 8 of your CAO's November report, states that library service is on target to meet its target of 49% of the number of items purchased in the last 5 years. Yet according to the PLVN statistics, this is the smallest percent of items purchased in the last 5 years of any of the 9 library services we have looked at.
I'm still waiting for the question, Mr.
Yes,
Fuller.
I'm just coming to that, Councillor, the context. In October 2018, Council officers informed us that the library plan would be completed by July 2019. On October the 21st this year, senior Council officers informed us that the consultant's plan will go to Council on the 4th of December 2019 and is due to be completed by March 2020. Now your CEO's November report states that the library plan has been delayed 2 months because consultation took longer than expected due to the number of groups who wanted to provide feedback. I believe stage 1 is still ongoing. I have 3 questions. When will the library plan review process be complete? Will you please resist your reflex instincts, and will you please make the library review process and the reports and recommendations it generates from the consultants transparent and open to all stakeholders? Port Phillip.
I'm tempted to rule that second question out. It was showing disrespect for our council officers that they're not transparent. I'll think about that.
It has been very difficult to get information on when this review has been complete.
One of the rules of engagement in this thing is that at public question time you ask questions and that they have to be respectful.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Port Phillip's libraries are in a very poor condition. Statistics of the 9 inner Melbourne municipalities reviewed show that between 2014 and 2018, you spent the least on capital and operating costs and less in real terms on materials in 2017-18 than you did in 2014.
3 minutes is up.
Will you please start investing in our libraries right now?
That's not a question.
Will you start investing in your libraries right now, was the question.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Woollett. Mr. Keenan?
Through you, Mayor. As we explained to Mr. Woollett and the Middle Park Library Action Group when we met on the 21st, we explained the timeline, but I'm happy to go through that again. March, April is when the plan will come back to Council. Then, depending on what Council, whether they want further changes, otherwise it will then go out for consultation. Consultation will be done in the same open, transparent ways that means that Council use for all of its consultations. And there is an annual maintenance budget, a capital budget for the library, which Council's endorsed. I'd have to take on notice whether the comparisons that Mr. Woolett's put forward are valid or correct. I'm happy to go and do that.
Thanks very much, Mr. Keenan. Second question, Isaac Herman.
Good evening, everyone. Isaac Herman from Elwood.
Hi.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors, council officers. From the CEO's report, I note the Elwood Esplanade oval upgrade at Elwood Park at $315,000. Are there any water-sensitive urban design or integrated water management features incorporated in this design? Parts of Elwood Esplanade are indeed prone to flooding. They wouldn't have to if Council lowered the level of the surface of those ovals. Has the plan complied with a stated policy of embedding water-sensitive urban design into all asset upgrades? I think we need to show by example, not just making demands on private multi-unit developments in terms of water-sensitive urban design and integrated water management, and also to show a good example for our neighbours. We've made all sorts of requests from neighbouring councils. So there's my question. What's the state of that plan?
Good questions. Who can help us with that one? Ms. Blair?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that project is an upgrade of one of the ovals at Elwood Reserve, and it will be replacing the existing irrigation, which currently has access to the Elsternwick stormwater harvesting scheme. The new irrigation system will continue to access stormwater harvesting water for the irrigation. In relation to other questions, I'd have to take those on notice.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Isaac. Bill Phelan, former councillor from South Melbourne. Yes, you must feel very at home. So, Bill, could I ask you to read your name and suburb into the record?
Thank you, Mr Mayor and Councillors. Bill Phelan from Port Melbourne. I've got a little lead into the question, and it's been inspired by a letter from a council staff member. You may recall about 18 months ago I asked you to consider an alternative plan to that approved by the previous council to close the slip lane from Graham Street to Albert Street, Port Melbourne. The plan, I said, would save $80,000. My request was denied by all except Councillor Pearl, as were my representations to Manager Brett Walters, General Manager Lillian Rossick and CEO Peter Smith. The Chief Traffic Engineer ruled supreme. The project was carried out, and I recently received correspondence relating to it from Traffic Engineer Mohammed Nur. It was full of relatively meaningless statistics regarding motor vehicles, pedestrians and cyclists in the surrounding streets, taken only during the pre- and post-school hours. He claimed the statistics demonstrated good design outcomes. What he didn't say was the project cost $139,000, where the O'Brien alternative could have been carried out for less than $40,000. It would have provided better pedestrian safety features whilst maintaining the convenient access for Albert Street residents all day and every day.
Could I ask you to come to your question, please?
Yes, I'm very close. That, in simple terms, $100,000 were wasted. Mr Mayor and Councillors, the question I ask is, what is it going to take for you to understand that your responsibilities are to those who elected you and not to the big spending bureaucracy you are meant to preside over?
I'll take that as a rhetorical question, and I don't want to expose our officers to that question, but thanks very much for that question. And yeah, I mean, we all spend here every day committed to our community. Thanks very much. Steve Phillips. Hi, could I ask you to read your name and suburb into the record, please?
Steve Phillips, resident of St Kilda. Is this thing on now?
It is now.
Steve Phillips, resident of St Kilda. Good evening, Mr Mayor and councillors and officers. Today it was reported that 11,000 scientists have warned of untold suffering due to the climate crisis unless there are major transformations to global society. Given that, I'd like to congratulate the City of Port Phillip for declaring a climate emergency recently in September. On your website you say that, and I quote, Port Phillip will incorporate the declaration in all of its relevant strategies and policies and consider the impact of climate change when planning and decision making. I have a related question about the St Kilda Festival, which I am an avid supporter of, by the way. I understand that approximately 30 diesel generators are required to stage the event. This seems counterintuitive in an urban area, but I have been advised that the electrical network capacity in the area is insufficient for the high level of power demand. These diesel generators create a large amount of noise, particulate and emissions pollution. Are these emissions included in Council's accounting for its directly generated emissions, is my first question. And my second question is that, given the declared climate emergency, is the Council investigating cleaner and more sustainable methods of powering the St Kilda Festival, such as biodiesel or perhaps even solar and battery energy sources?
Great questions. I think we'll have to take those on notice. Oh no, you're ready to rock and roll? Okay.
Through you, Mayor. So we can advise, pardon me, that the tender that went out has included a requirement for the for the successful generator provider to report back on any emissions or to report back on the fuel use, which can then be incorporated into council's emissions. The tender also requires for the consideration of options, including biofuels and any other opportunities or innovations to reduce emissions. So that is included within the scope of the tender, which is currently out to market. So it hasn't closed at this point in time. We would also mention that the generators, as I understand them, are backup generators, and the main supply of electricity will be through main supply, which is council procured 100% renewable energy. And in addition to that, we are planning through the Act and Adapt strategy to go to zero net emissions from 2021. And so the emissions that will be accounted from these generators in future will be offset from 2021.
Thanks very much. Great question. Really interesting answer.
Can I follow up with another question? Do I have some time? You mentioned that they're used as backup generators, whereas in the past they've been running constantly throughout the festival. Has this changed?
I'll need to take that on notice.
Well, I can assure you if you walk around during the festival, which I do, they're running constantly.
Okay,
they're not
sorry,
backup.
we can't take comment.
Thank you.
Just questions. Okay, thanks very much. That's the end of public question time. Councillors, any questions for the officers? Councillor Copsey.
Thank you. I had a question. It relates to some concerns recently raised by the Port Phillip Baykeeper about upcoming channel dredging to be undertaken from mid-November to February 2020 by Port of Melbourne. The Baykeeper had raised queries about the impacts of potentially contaminated sediment and the absence of ongoing testing for contaminants, and pointed out that this occurs at a time when we've got really high recreational use by the bay, not just for swimming and walking and all of that sort of thing, but recreational fishing and also the time when the St Kilda penguins are feeding their new season chicks. So my question, is what can council do to help allay these concerns and find out more about the process and the potential risks for community using the bay from the dredging?
Thanks very much, Councillor Cosby. Mark?
Through you, Mr Mayor. So we have looked briefly into this issue. The dredging is approved by the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, as we understand it, as the delegate for the Minister of Environment, Climate Change and Water. And that is approved through the Dredging Program 2012 to 2022 Environmental Management Plan. So it has a comprehensive plan around how dredging is managed. The plan was last revised in October 2016 and does require monitoring for contamination of sediments, but doesn't specify the detail of what monitoring is required to occur. We here at Council don't have any role in approving that dredging in any way, so there isn't a direct way we could influence the process. We do note that the EPA monitors the Port Phillip beaches during the summer, and that there are also new EPA regulations coming into force from July 2020 that include a general environmental duty, which we would assume in some form that this dredging needs to address. So possibly one thing we could consider is asking for some clarification from the Dredging Authority as how they're proposing to respond to the upcoming changes in regulations from the EPA.
Sorry, thanks very much. Any further questions? Any follow-up questions?
Just a quick one, if I could.
Yep. Councillor Pearl.
Last Thursday, Friday, as the weather warmed up, there was a lot of jet skis out, 20 to 30 jet skis. I counted out on the water, creating a fair bit of noise pollution and general menace. Others were behaving perfectly normal and safely. I didn't see any law breaking in terms of coming in between the shoreline and the yellow barrier, but I'm told that that did occur above 5 kilometres an hour, etc. My question is to officers, what should residents do when they either observe this behaviour or have complaints in relation to jet skis over the summer months?
Good question.
I'll take that question on notice.
Okay. Any further questions? I see none, so let's now move on to the presentation of reports. I'm going to go through these in order. Agenda item 8, which is the presentation number issue 60 of the CEO's report. There are no comments from the community. Councillors? Councillor Voss?
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. In the CEO's report, it talks about the green cones, and I was just wondering if there's been any feedback on how they're being used. I know there's been quite a significant uptake, and the size of them, and whether the size of them are large enough for families.
Mark? Damien?
Through you, Mr Mayor. The feedback on the program, we understand to date, has been positive, though we've received suggestions about better clarifying the size and perhaps how they need to be located. Overall, the program's exceeding our expectation and sales are going well. And whilst the green cones accept all kinds of food, and a single unit is designed for a family of 4, I understand. And we're continuing to seek more feedback from residents through the Sustainable Port Phillip website.
And? Sorry, Councillor Simic?
Thank you, Mayor. My question is regarding page 9 of the report, our organisational scorecard, under inspiring leadership, a capable workforce and a culture of high performance and safety. The 3 benchmarks there all have crosses against them. What are we doing to address this, and what steps is Council taking to resolve some of the issues in this reporting?
Through you, Mayor, we would need to take that on notice.
Okay, good questions. Councillor Voss?
Thank you, Mayor. That was a question about the recordable injury rate I also had, being why it's quite high and if there's any trends. But the other question I had, was who decides what goes into the CEO report?
Mr Acting CEO?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'll start, but I'm sure Mr Ross will be able to add more to that. As you can see, the CEO report is based on the council plan. So in setting up your council plan, you set up a range of measures, priority projects and initiatives, and we try to give a consolidated report back on that on a monthly basis and how we're making progress on those priorities articulated in the council plan. Do you have anything further to add, Mr Ross?
Through you, Mr Mayor, no.
So, Mr Ross, is it you that puts together the CEO report?
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, so my team is responsible for putting the report together, and based on what the acting CEO has said, all that information, we collect a lot of information from across the organisation. We then present it to the executive, a draft version to the executive, which they then provide us feedback on.
Councillor Simic?
At page 11, the in our backyard strategy implementation has a cross against it, that we're off track. Now, since I've been on council, this project has had a cross against it. What steps are we taking to address the significant issues in this project area? Because as we're now constantly approaching the completion date for the project, it's a bigger concern each time we look at this.
Through you, Mayor. So a couple of things have been done to progress this. I guess the first is that the settings of the plan in terms of the social housing are reliant on state government or Commonwealth government funding being available for projects to reach that target. So there may need to be a situation at some stage where council may wish to reconsider that if funds are not forthcoming from state or Commonwealth government. So that's the first thing. The second thing in relation to that, we're still awaiting the outcomes of the first round of the Social Housing Growth Fund to see whether any projects will be funded in that. If so, that will then get us on track with the establishment of some social housings. We know there are a number of projects in that round. It will then be a question of whether or not the state government provides a new round of funding. If they don't, it is very difficult to see how any new housing can be delivered under your current settings. And it would be a case then of whether we had to come back to council to change those settings. But the current settings rely on roughly 80% of the funds being provided by parties other than council. That would be primarily state government and or borrowings or contributions from housing providers.
Councillor Simic?
Thank you for that, Mr. Keenan. Just to follow up on that, we have had reports presented to Council in the last year even that look at providing some solutions, including establishing different governance structures in order for us to continue this work. Is it possible, and some of this might need to be taken on notice, but possibly get an update on where we're up to in regards to those as well?
Yes, that's possible. Yeah. Oh, now? Okay, so again, the assumptions underpinning those options was that there would be a program of works which involved contribution from state or Commonwealth government and council. As that's not forthcoming, and it doesn't appear to be forthcoming anytime soon, we're now looking at how we reset those. So whether we wait for further funding to be made available or do we look at other alternatives. But that would involve resetting on the part of council in terms of your expectations as to what could be delivered for the amount council's allocated.
Councillor Voss?
Thank you. Under bad and doubtful debts, is the amount owing due to the Fines Victoria debacle included there, or is it included somewhere else?
Through you, Mayor, the bad and doubtful debt provision does include the Fines Victoria related amount.
Councillor Bond?
My question concerns the much anticipated and much welcomed Ackland Street Precinct CCTV. It says in the CEO's report that the cameras are anticipated to be operational by the end of December 2019. That is now passed. Is anyone able to confirm that these end of October 2019, that's now passed? Is anyone able to confirm that they are up and operational, all 7 of them?
Sorry, Ms Blair?
Through you, Mr Mayor. The cameras are not all up and operational. Those cameras that are referred to in the CEO's report, we are still working with the owners of the property on finalising agreements around access. The staff are contacting the relevant bodies every day, but when we're putting assets on third parties, it can be out of our control, but the officers are working very diligently to try and get that on, and we're hopeful that in the next fortnight they'll be operational.
Councillor Bond?
3 of the cameras were put on council assets, I believe. Can you confirm that they're all operational, those 3? And it's just the 4 on third-party assets that are not operational?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'll just get Mr Trail to come down, who's directly looking after that project.
Thanks very much, Mr. Trail.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. The challenge at the moment is getting the signal back to the Victoria Police Station. So we've got cameras installed at our locations. The third-party agreement's about making sure the signal can get the transmission via the third-party properties where we've got transmitters to ensure that footage gets back to the Victoria Police Station.
Oh, okay.
So just to confirm, none of the 7 are currently operational?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, 2 of the 7 are currently operating.
And transmitting back to the police station?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Right.
Thanks very much, Mr. Trail. Councillor Voss.
I'd just like to ask a question about the money received, the $500,000 from Rail Projects Victoria due to the loss of car parking in and around the domain. Just wondering where in the accounts that money will be allocated to. Would it be a reserve for something else, or is it just go into general revenue? I was just curious.
Through you, Mayor, it will be allocated to the operating revenue.
Okay. Councillor Voss.
One last question from me. It's about Northport Oval. It says in the report that work is being done on areas around the Oval. I'm just wondering what that is.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the works that are being designed up are for new fencing and access gates into the venue.
Can I clarify, is the fencing external fencing?
Yes, that's correct.
Thanks, Ms. Blair. Councillor Pearl.
Thanks, Mayor. On page 21, I was just wondering, the $240,000 a year we're currently spending on interest donating money to the National Australia Bank. I'm just wondering, given the strong cash position of the council, when will we be paying that money back so we can all sit down and do a collective debt-free scream and be proud of the sustainable nature of Port Phillip's balance sheet, and also save the ratepayers $20,000 in interest fees to National Australia Bank that we don't need to be paying?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, at the moment I believe that we've, as part of our financial strategy endorsed by Council last year, that we look to repay that at the end of the loan term, which was 7 years. I think it's in a couple of years' time. We'll confirm that during the budget process for this year, including coming back to councillors in December on the 10-year financial outlook, where you can look at all your settings around that.
Just follow up, if I could, Mayor. Is there any contractual reasons why we couldn't pay that money back well before that date?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as we've previously outlined several times to Councillor Pearl, there are contractual obligations that prevent us from paying that back early.
Thanks very much. Okay, so there's no further questions. Do we have a resolution? Motion? Moved Councillor Bond, seconded Councillor Voss. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Bond? Do you wish to speak? Anyone else wish to speak? I'm tempted, but I won't. I will now move to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare it carried unanimously. Thanks very much. 9.1, Neighbourhood Ngargees and the consumption of alcohol. Councillors, we've got no speakers on this, but we do have an alternative recommendation. So, councillors, are there questions or motions? Good on you. Thanks, Councillor Voss. Seconded by Councillor Pearl. Do you wish to speak to that, Councillor Voss? Can I thank the officers for really making it much clearer now? Councillor Pearl?
I'll drink bubble water instead of alcohol, but some people want to drink alcohol, so put this up. It's been well dealt with by officers and a good bit of feedback from one of the last meetings from the community. So thanks for dealing with it and dealing with it pretty promptly.
Great. Any further? Do you wish to close, Councillor Voss? Move to the vote. All those in favour? I sense that's unanimous. Thanks very much. 9.2, Friends of Suai, Covalima Annual Report. Megs Alston, Chair of Friends of Suai, Covalima. Welcome. Great to see you, and I'm sure it'll be great to hear from you.
Thanks very much, Mr Mayor, and thank you again for the opportunity to present the annual report of Friends of Suai for 2018-19 to Council. I'm only going to refer to some of the highlights in the annual report, which you and the Council notes, I know, fill you in on what's gone on in the last year. But some of the highlights of the impressive work and achievements which I'd like to draw to your attention include the installation of a second village lighting scheme that provides solar power to another 39 households in an off-grid rural hamlet. 40 young people enabled to study at secondary and tertiary levels because of scholarships granted during the 2019 school year. The commencement of With One Seed, the new forestry scheme we support, which provides income for subsistence farmers and which, once fully established, will become an accredited carbon trading scheme. The Covalima Community Centre's involvement in advocacy in Covalima related to the impact of local infrastructure development in that district, and the ongoing support for women's leadership and economic activities. And one other education-related activity was some training, workshops and training that was conducted for science and maths teachers working throughout the district of Covalima in secondary schools. Here in the city of Port Phillip, some of the local engagement highlights were hosting a visit from the Community Centre's Director, Alberto Barros, for 2 weeks in October 2018. He met with councillors and council staff, as well as with our volunteers, supporters and donors. This type of interaction really enriches the friendship, as it gave Alberto an insight into governance matters and a deeper understanding of the working of local government, as well as providing a boost to our supporters and a better understanding here of the problems faced in Covalima, getting it at first hand, if you like. Another highlight was the first Timor-Leste festival held in Ackland Plaza in March 2019. It was a great success, it was well attended, raised our profile and showcased Timorese traditional dance and culture and music. This was our most successful year yet for fundraising, with a total of $88,500 raised through a combination of donations, which was $78,816, and several fundraising activities, including the annual trivia night. So this demonstrates very strong support from within our community for the work that goes on. Despite all the achievements that are highlighted or outlined in the annual report, it's worth remembering that Timor-Leste it's still one of the poorest countries in Southeast Asia. And although some of the indicators or development indicators, health indicators, for example, are gradually improving, there's still a long way to go on many fronts. For example, there are very high rates of under 5 mortality, children under 5 with underweight and malnourished, and very high risk of preventable disease. We work in friendship with a district that suffers from the usual challenges of remoteness, with less services available and with high rates of unemployment. Our relatively modest inputs make a significant difference there, particularly with scholarships, and I would also say the work of the coordinator in strengthening the capacity of the staff and the systems of our partner, the Covalima Community Centre, which is a vibrant and very successful community organisation. After the end of the financial year, Timor-Leste celebrated the 20th anniversary of its independence. As we all know, there was a lot of publicity about that here in Australia. We're approaching the 20th anniversary of the friendship next year, and plans are in hand to celebrate that, both here and in Suai. We will develop a new strategic plan to take us forward that will look at sustainability for the friendship and an increasing independence and less dependence, I guess, on the donations from here. On behalf of Friends of Suai, I thank the Council once again for its ongoing support, which makes a huge difference. Thank you.
Thanks. Inspiring highlights and moving report. Councillors, thanks, Megs. Any questions? Motions?
Just a quick, obvious question, if it's okay. We're 20 years down the track. How would you describe this to the average ratepayer in terms of value for money, and what the ratepayer gets out of it? And I know it's a bit of a crude question, but it's a fair question, because as a councillor, we get this a lot. So I'm interested to hear your view on how you would justify it.
Well, look, I think we did some calculations recently, and I think that Carleen knows the figures better than I do. I think it's something like, out of the total rates that are paid, it's something like 50 cents. Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
That's okay.
Yeah, okay. Per household, it's less than $1.50 per household contribution. However, in terms of value for money, I think we have to take into account the quite large voluntary contributions that are made at this end. So we have quite a large group of supporters, a small group of dedicated people who are regular supporters, and then a larger group of people who give money. The people who are involved in the committee give time, expertise and skill. Many of them are quite experienced in this type of work, so we're getting very good value for money in terms of the amount of money that's expended as opposed to the value of the contribution. It would be my estimation would be 2 to 3 times more in terms of dollar value when you look at the advice, the time that's given and so on by volunteers here. In terms of outcomes, the changes are absolutely remarkable. I've been involved in Friends of Suai. Well, I was involved when it started in the year 2000. I was then working for Australian Volunteers, and an approach was made to come to the council and request this partnership, this friendship to be formed. And at that stage, basically you could say it's almost like ground zero. There was nothing, the place had been destroyed once the Indonesian army withdrew, and destroyed a lot of the infrastructure, housing, schools, hospitals and so on. When you look now at the sort of people that we've invested in terms of their skills and capabilities, particularly in Suai and Covalima, they're very capable, they're very independent. They've formed their own community organisation which has been registered nationally, which is quite a big thing for a very remote rural community, and they're skilling themselves up all the time through the contributions that are made and the input that's made from this end in terms of information technology, English, other sorts of education activities, and then the scholarship scheme. I don't want to go on for too long, so I'm not meant to talk for too long, but I would think in terms of value for money, you get a very big bang for the buck.
And a quick follow-on, if I could, just remember what it was. Yes, there it is. Housing First is a good example of an organisation that was grown out of council that's become much, much larger and independent and financially sustainable of its own rights. It took 30 years of my reading for it to get there. You talked about financial sustainability when you talked before about alternate fundraising, which seems to be going extraordinarily well. Do you see a day in your strategic plan where the financial support from council will decline, in principle support will maintain, as we do with all the groups that we've started or supported here?
Yeah. Look, I think that's the objective with any kind of long-term development activity like this, that you're hoping for independence and sustainability in the long run. It's just that it takes a long time, and they have made quite significant gains in the last 10 years compared to the first 10 years. And when you think there was nothing, there was no community, there was no organisation there, and now it's a hub from which a lot of other community activities develop. But you're right, we are looking, I mentioned that very briefly, we haven't really focused on it yet, but in discussions with the Mayor we've talked about the need to think term plan and to ensure that there is increased independence, if you like. In the last 5 to 10 years, the organisation has sought funding from a range of other non-government organisations and other players, and they've been very successful. So there's quite a range of other agencies supporting them in projects. And they have a social enterprise activity which raises its own money through the council's computers that are given there every year and that they fix up and sell, and there's a training scheme attached to that. But yeah, it's absolutely the aim. It's just that people don't always, you can't do these things overnight, and you have to give enough lead time for that sustainability to take effect.
Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Moved by Councillor Pearl, seconded by Councillor Baxter. Do you wish to speak? Councillor Baxter?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to thank Megs and the Friends of Suai committee for all the work that they do, as well as Carleen, our staff member, who assists with so many things. This is an amazing report, and to see the change that's occurring there in terms of the village lighting scheme, the With One Seed program, the scholarships. It's such a diverse range of sort of what one might call nation-building projects or community-building projects that it's something that we should all be really proud of contributing to. I know that perhaps some councillors might sort of question the value of our contribution here. What I would say is that we make contributions to a number of groups who are going out and doing good, and there are benefits in what they do, even if it's just a bowls club. The benefits are that they are getting together and you know, having a good time, and that there's some community benefit simply from connecting people in that way. I would say that the Friends of Suai have been an amazing social connector within the city of Port Phillip, let alone overseas. The way that they've been able to bring people together to work towards really admirable aims has been outstanding, and one need only attend the trivia night to see the diversity of people that come together to support these really worthy aims. So I believe we may be banned from further trivia nights because the councillors' table keeps winning, but or it may be because of the mayor's
outrageous behaviour.
But we will hope to continue our support going on, because I think that the work that this community does is definitely good for the community in Covalima, but it's really, really good for the community here as something that they can participate in.
Thank you. Councillor Simic.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter, for those excellent work, and thank you for serving as Council's representative on that committee as well. I'd like to thank the Chair for coming tonight and speaking. It is absolutely fantastic that Council has an involvement in this project, and I absolutely love everything that you've presented tonight and all of the work which you've outlined in your report as well. I am stoked to hear that there's been growth in fundraising, and that I know that it's always a small group of dedicated volunteers that end up doing so much of the work, and I thank you for being those volunteers. But as you can see, the work that you're putting in is paying off. It's changing people's lives overseas. And it's also changing people's lives locally as well, being able to participate and be involved in this committee. I'm sorry, I haven't attended a trivia night previously, but I also know that my council colleagues would know that I probably wouldn't contribute much to a team when it comes to trivia. It's not my strength, but I'm very happy to support all of your work otherwise. Thank you.
Councillor Brand.
Yes, I'd just like to endorse Megs's answer to Councillor Pearl. Just if I could just make an addition to that. It's always struck me that everybody every organisation and every country, all types of sort of actors in society care about making contributions to the community in charitable work and charitable donations and what have you. And nations give aid to other nations, and individuals give aid or give charity to various people, and churches give and schools give. In this case, it's not necessary for a city council to actually make this sort of donation of time and of money and effort, but it is actually a very appropriate activity that we take part in, because it is actually, we're working as a municipality to a municipality. It is something which is a very appropriate way for a municipality to make worthwhile donations. It's not donation, I'm just trying to think of the right word, but contributions. And we were asked as a municipality to do that, to help for this municipality here in Melbourne, with a whole lot of other municipalities doing the same things, relating directly to the new municipalities in East Timor. So it is something which is actually tied to our nature as local government to be doing this. It's not something which local government has just decided to pick up and do that other people could do, or other corporations or other tiers of government. It is something which is appropriate. It's the whole system has been designed around that level of giving and that level of relating and that level of forming partnerships. So if we were going to put money into this sort of thing, this is the sort of project that a local government should do, because it's only a local government can do it. I think that's, to me, a convincing reason why, if we put money into this, and time and effort, and our community, channel our community's efforts and time and money, then this is exactly the project that has to be done by a local government like us. And it's fantastic.
Thanks very much for those wise words, Councillor Brand. Do you wish to close, Councillor Pearl?
If I could, Councillor Brown, I guess what you're saying there may have been true 20 years ago, but I don't think council's actually doing this great work. I think it's been done by a community-run organisation with council assistance. A small nuance change to what you said, perhaps, but a very, very major one. So our country had a foreign intervention in a foreign country, albeit we were invited to turn up there, and there's certain responsibilities that come with that. And 20 years ago, this council took some of that obligation on, but having heard the questions here this evening and the pathways that the organisation seems to be moving forward in terms of sustainability and independence, I'm more than happy to move this annual report and strongly suggest that you fellow councillors vote for it and support the contents of the annual report. But as the years go by, as history moves on, this council also needs to be cognizant of the support we've provided in the past and the direction this great organisation heads in the future and our role in it also. And that would be nothing but prudent for this council to do that. So thank you for Councillor Baxter for representing councillors much more as the most adequate representative on that committee, and you've done a great job. And thank you for coming here every year as well as this evening to face the music and answer all our questions. We appreciate it.
I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thanks very much, Megs. Okay. 11.1, the Vineyard, redevelopment proposal and new lease community consultation results. Councillors, there are no speakers to tonight's item. Do you have any questions? If not, do you have any motions?
Just a quick question. How much money have we spent in total in fees and consulting and officer time roughly on this lease project?
Ms McNeil?
Through you, Mayor, I would need to take that question on notice.
Thank you. Councillor Pearl?
Would it be possible in future for these type of reports to get that information in the officer's report?
Yeah. Ms McNeil?
Through you, Mayor, yes, we can do that.
No further questions? Could I have a resolution? Councillor Bond? Councillor Crawford? Councillor Bond? Councillor Crawford, do you wish to speak? Move to the vote. All those in favour? I sense that's unanimous. Let's put a tick here. 14.1. Status of Council decisions and questions taken on notice recorded by Council 1 July to 30 September 2019. Councillors, there are no questions from or contributions from the community. Do we have any questions? Do I have a motion? Moved Councillor Bond, seconded Councillor Voss. Speakers? Move to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. 14.2, Council and Planning Committee meeting night timetable for 2020. Move Councillor Pearl, seconded Councillor Brand.
Councillor Voss has a question.
Sorry, question, Councillor Voss?
Yes, I didn't check it myself, but have we made sure that it's not on any particular, that there aren't any meetings on special holidays? Just wanted to double check that that's the case.
Ms Pearce?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the timetable has been checked for religious holidays and days of significance. Additionally, the recommendation allows for the CEO and the Mayor to amend the days if required.
Any further questions? Sorry, I was a bit precipitous. Moved and seconded. Speakers? Move to the vote. All those in favour? And that's unanimous. 14.3, proposed discontinuance of road abutting 285 to 287 Inkerman Street and 3 to 7 Nelson Street, Balaclava. There are no speakers from the community. Councillors, are there any questions? Are there any motions? Moved Councillor Bond, seconded Councillor Pearl. Councillor Bond? Councillor Pearl, do you wish to speak? Do you wish to speak? Councillor Crawford?
It's not exactly for the side street, but I do lament that the selling of this side street and the incorporation of it means that we have lost the wonderful house on Nelson Street with the wishing well and the lights and the blow-up kangaroo on the roof. No, but it's a big local icon, deal. And it's no longer there as part of this whole development. So that I shall miss.
I think that's a reasonable observation. Any further? Councillor Baxter?
I'd echo Councillor Crawford's mourning for the loss of the wishing well. All proceeds from that wishing well went to Sacred Heart. So that was also just something nice that you could go by. Well, that's what the sign said. That's as far as I could. This is quite a big. Sort of sell-off of public land. I understand the reasons for it. I understand that the officers have really had a good look at whether or not there is any better use for this space within our current lens of how we use these sorts of space. I still think that we need to be far more creative about how we can utilise open space in the future. And I think that when we sell off big chunks like this, it can be constraining our future options, but I certainly understand and accept the rationale behind this report.
Okay, I think that's well spoken. Any other speakers? I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare it carried. Thanks very much. 14.4, proposed discontinuance and sale of road at the rear of 225 Page Street, Middle Park. Once again, there are no contributions from the community. Are there any questions from councillors? Could I have a resolution motion, please? Moved Councillor Pearl, seconded Councillor Voss. Any speeches? Move to the vote. All those in favour? Declare that carried. Notices of agenda item 15, notices of motion. Councillors, there are no notices of motion. Agenda item 16, reports by councillor delegates. Councillors, do we have any reports from councillor delegates? I'm going to start off with the MAV. And they've got a really interesting campaign on rates and exemption from rates by certain organisations, and I commend the MAV for running this campaign, and I recommend that councillors have a look at their stuff. Any others?
Yeah, just quickly, I have the great pleasure, alongside Councillor Voss, of being on the South Melbourne Market Management Committee, and Danielle Bleasby, I can never pronounce her name. How do I pronounce it? Bleasby.
I think you stuffed it up again, but that's okay.
Councillor Voss, would you like to put that in the record?
Bleasby.
Bleasby.
Robbie Ngargees
was successful, appointed as the executive manager of South Melbourne Market, and commenced work this week. So she comes from the AFL. And has a huge amount of event management experience and project management experience. We're hoping to complement that with the immense amount of retail experience that's already in the team there. And we wish her well in her duties. And we thank Mark Edmund, who's been acting in that position for some months, who's done a terrific job. He'll be leaving shortly, and he's been kind enough to hang around and do a complete and thorough transfer over. So that's the quick update on the South Melbourne Market.
Great. Okay, I'll move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 17, urgent business. Councillors, we have one item of urgent business, being a trial of electric shared bicycles. I need a mover and a seconder for council to accept the item of urgent business before we get on to the substantive item. And that's been moved, Councillor Voss, and seconded Councillor Brand. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? That's all those against? Carried. It's okay, you don't have to vote. We did have a quorum. We only had one...
division.
No, we didn't. 1, 2, 3.
We had division?
Okay, division. All those in favour? Councillors Baxter, Crawford, Voss, Brand and Copsey. All those against? Councillor Pearl. I declare that carried. 17.1, City of Port Phillip trial of electric shared bicycles. Councillors, are there any questions of the officers in relation to this item? Councillor Simic?
If officers can provide an overview and what's brought this motion to us tonight.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Council officers have been meeting with City of Melbourne and City of Yarra following representations from an electric bicycle, what do you call it, a shared electric bicycle provider, an e-bike provider. Those conversations have been around how we might be able to put a process in place to help us manage the introduction of those e-bikes. They currently don't need any permission from council to roll out, but we understand that a major operator is considering a rollout from late this year, early next year, across a number of municipalities in Melbourne. The purpose of this evening's urgent item is that the City of Melbourne is looking to undertake an EOI that I understand has been signed and will be going potentially into the newspaper this weekend, which will allow for a 2-week competitive EOI, which hopes to shortlist 2 prospective e-bike companies that they then propose to enter into an MOU with. The wording of both that EOI and that MOU have been worded in such a way that we can join either of those two processes, and in particular the MOU, if we so wish to, and noting that the end of the year and with extremely full council agendas for the remaining two meetings, we thought we'd put this up this evening to you because there was more time in this meeting than in those others.
Thanks very much. Councillor Simic?
Thank you for that explanation. I'm just wondering what future touch points from a governance perspective exist for council if this is adopted tonight, particularly as we haven't given direction around the parameters of an MOU. At what point will we have an opportunity to provide input into that?
Good question. Do you want to take that on notice?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I guess what we're proposing tonight, given that there is a bit of speed with some of the introduction potentially of e-bike providers that don't have to have council authorisation, is that I'm seeking your delegation to manage that and to work with other councils to try and manage that the best we can. The alternative is that those providers will go without any restrictions or agreement with this council administration around how they would operate.
Dick. Councillor Simic?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, just I guess to clarify, if an MOU is to be agreed on, will that inevitably come to a council meeting further down the track, or will that, or can that, according to this wording, be entered into by the CEO?
Through you, Mr Mayor, in accordance with the wording here tonight, it would give me authorisation, or Peter, Mr Smith, upon his return, authorisation to enter into such an MOU. In terms of timing, if the MOU or decision-making wasn't required until council returned in February next year, then it could certainly be brought back to council at that point in time. We would obviously keep councillors informed of developments as they proceed. And as noted here, it would be looking at introduction of a trial. And we have done some examination of a similar arrangement with the City of Sydney, which is the basis of the MOUs that we've been discussing that provide some greater control around how these are managed.
Councillor Pearl?
Thank you, Mayor. Just wondering why the need for an urgent item of business this evening, why it couldn't wait a couple of weeks so we could do it in full transparency. We're doing it in full transparency, but it hasn't been put on the agenda, etc. So just wondering why we have to do this with such haste.
Through you, Mr Mayor, as noted by Mr Dewar, there's things happening at the moment, including the EOI process. We've also had a direct approach from an operator who's proposing they may actually go out and start this in the next couple of weeks. Therefore, the timeframes around potentially entering into an MOU and aspects like that, we need to be able to work with some confidence over the next couple of weeks that we can move ahead with that. And in addition, we've got a very loaded agenda for the next two council meetings on the 20th of November and the 4th of December as well.
So we've got two motions. One to, I've had a bit of a seniors moment. We haven't yet moved and seconded the motion for urgent business, have we? Or yes, we have. Okay, we've done that. So let's move to the second substantive motion on that one. So do we have any more questions? A mover? Moved Councillor Voss, seconded Councillor Brand. Sorry, Councillor Copsey. Do you wish to speak?
Thank you. I'm happy to support this motion. I think it's important that we learn from the past. And what we're only looking at here is a trial. The community did react very strongly to O-Bikes and their company's really blatant disregard for our public space and our amenity and basically our community. I am hoping that things in the MOU will say things like the bikes will be collected overnight, they'll be charged up, they'll be repositioned in more appropriate sort of places, and that some data will also be shared with us to help us understand whether the trial is successful in terms of usage. I still urge, though, that the state government does come to the party on this and introduce the regulations in relation to managing this sort of disruptor, if you like, by using the Road Safety Act and its powers there. So anyway, councillors, I do hope you will support this motion.
Great. Councillor Brown, do you wish to speak?
Yes, I apologise to Councillor Copsey for jumping in to second it when it's really she is a keen champion of bicycles and all things electronic into the future like this. This is I think we're going about this the right way. Things are going to crop up time and again that we don't know quite how to handle, but it's really important. I think the last sentence is important, that reaffirming our strategy, which is our community should benefit from new transport options and technology, and this is the way to go. We can't predict how it's going to go. We can guess that there might be some difficult outcomes. There could be all sorts of huge benefits into the future with this, and I think it's right that we take an orderly approach to it with the interests of our community in mind, and support it as enthusiastically and constructively as we can.
Councillor Simic.
Thank you. I'm keen to support this tonight. I'm a bit concerned around the process and would have preferred if we would have had enough time to consider some parameters or a baseline of things that this council would want a MOU to agree to. But I'm really conscious of the situation we're in and the circumstances that we're in, and fully agree that we need to try and move into this next few months if any providers look to come online in an orderly way, in a way where we do have a process in place. I know that some of the concerns that were expressed around OBIKE previously was that this MOU process didn't happen in time. There was a lot of misunderstanding and not an orderly process. So I think that this is a good way forward. From a governance point of view, personally, I would have preferred a little bit more oversight from this chamber in terms of how we manage the MOU process. But having said that, I have full confidence in our CEO and acting CEO, of course, as well, that they'll keep councillors abreast with any progress, and that there'll be an opportunity for further discussions with the person negotiating the MOU at the time.
Councillor Copsey.
Thank you. Councillor Brand's correct. I'm passionate about all sorts of sustainable and active transport options. And
things electric, evidently.
No comment on that. I think it's certainly better that we try and prepare for the arrival of this technology which is coming, whether we are ready or not, and whether the state government is ready or not. I echo Councillor Voss's comments around us needing much improved leadership from the state on all sorts of shared mobility challenges. There's no way that local councils can individually respond to these. By their very nature, people are going to be using these technologies across municipal borders. So I echo Councillor Voss's comments there, but I'm also really pleased to hear that we are in discussion with some of our neighbours regarding how we manage the introduction of these. There's great benefits that can be gained. Electric shared bikes, I think this will give a lot of people when the technology arrives and the dockless bikes arrive, it will be a fantastic way for people to experience the convenience, the and the real benefits of electric bikes, they solve a lot of last mile problems potentially, and I do hope that we'll see some of the potential impacts which we've already seen when operators launch without considering the impacts that they can have, mitigated through this process. So all the best to the officers for advancing this, and I think we'll welcome a respectful relationship with a provider as that comes along, and I hope that that this will be a good start to getting that off on the right foot, because after all, these tools do end up occupying a lot of public space, and I think that our community has a right and an expectation for commercial providers to recognise that and work with the municipalities and the state government to minimise those impacts.
Thanks very much. Councillor Pearl?
I'm going to vote against this for three main reasons. Firstly, the dot point number 1. I think that decision should be brought to a council meeting to make a decision in full view of the public, aligned with what Councillor Simic was saying. Second reason is I think we need to cool our heels a little. We've got the scooter proposal moving forward, albeit that might be going a bit slower than we all perhaps thought it would be. But I think we need a bit more time to iron out how these schemes more generally fit, and I have a bit more hope for the scooter scheme than I do for this one, given the market signalling and market perception of the O-bike debacle. I think that's worthwhile what to call it. And the third reason is I get the feeling there's a bit of deal heat in this, in terms of somebody else has a transaction on the table. There's no reason why we can't join an MOU or anything later on, or enter in our own MOU. And if a commercial business chooses to launch a scheme without an MOU or without our involvement, I think we're much better placed now to deal with it, albeit we still don't have the laws, etc., from the state government, but we have the knowledge and infrastructure to adequately deal with those sorts of situations. So not going to support the motion we have in front of us as an urgent item of business here this evening.
Thanks very much. Councillor Pearl. Do you wish to close, Councillor Voss? Sorry? You don't wish to close?
No, I wish to speak.
Oh, I wish to speak, sorry.
Yeah, I won't be supporting this either for very similar reasons to Councillor Pearl. I think we've established that the dockless bicycles was an unmitigated disaster, and electric bicycles are not. I think we're going to see a repeat of that with this. We're already trialling scooters, electric scooters. I think it's best we let one go and see how that goes, rather than complicate the issues by adding in another potential competitor to the scooters. I also don't think we need to rush into this. We need to take our time and make a considered decision and set parameters around this as a council on what we want to see. Rushing into proposals like this because some other council's about to sign an agreement or whatever happens to be out there is very poor decision making. We're our own council. We need to be sitting here making our own considered decisions, and as a council we need to take responsibility for those decisions, not palm that off to officers, because I think it's a very important issue. It was a big inconvenience to our community when the O-bikes were out there, and we need to ensure that this isn't a repeat of that same farcical situation. And I think I think we should look at, if we're going to bring back a shared bicycle scheme or a shared electrical bicycle scheme, we should make them docked. They're all over countries in other parts of the world. They have docked electrical bicycle share schemes. I think we should look at something like that, because the dockless ones have proven, in this country anyway, to be a complete failure.
Okay, Councillor Voss?
Just to finish off, I agree with Councillor Bond and Councillor Pearl in particular that no one wants a farcical situation like what happened with O-bikes. I don't think that's going to happen, and I'll tell you why it's not going to happen is because our officers are going to be on the front foot now, getting in first and making sure there's some understanding about how we want people to behave in our municipality. Because if we don't, we just let them do whatever they like, because they'll come in and do whatever they want anyway. So it is important, I think, that we set out the ground rules and their expectations and how we want these sorts of companies to behave in our community, and so that's why I think an MOU is the right way to go about it.
Move to the vote. All those in favour? Against?
Call a division if we could.
Carried. All those in favour? Councillors Gross, Voss, Crawford, Baxter, Copsey, Simic and Brand. All those against? Councillors Bond and Pearl. Declare it carried. Agenda item 18, confidential matters. Councillors, we have no confidential items tonight. There being no further business, I declare the meeting closed. Before 8:30. Amazing.